Looking for your next great read? Welcome to the PBS Books Virtual Library, where stories come to life. Explore our recommended reads, curate your own reading list by genre and theme, and hear directly from beloved authors and library experts. Whether you're looking for inspiration, a classroom resource, or your next library club pick, it's all here. Visit pbsbooks.org and click on Virtual Library to explore and create your custom reading list today. Now you can support PBS Books every time you pick up a new book. We've partnered with bookshop.org, so a portion of every purchase via our affiliate link goes to PBS Books. It helps us bring you more author conversations, community programming, and library resources. Ready to make a difference? Visit pbsbooks.org/bookshop and find your next book today.
Support for Exploring Bipartisanship, provided by the Bipartisan Leadership Project and viewers like you. Thank you. The Bipartisan Leadership Project equips people with what it takes to lead in polarized environments, find solutions for the common good, and enable families and friends to disagree without being disagreeable. Learn more at bipartisanleadership.org.
At PBS Books, we celebrate stories and the people who love them. Explore your next must-read in our virtual library. Meet your favorite authors in exclusive conversations. Dive into PBS-themed talks that take you deeper into the stories you love. And join a digital community of readers like you. From books to behind-the-scenes stories, PBS Books is the one stop for all your bookish needs. Visit pbsbooks.org today. Good evening and welcome to PBS Books Live. I'm Heather-Marie Montilla. Tonight we continue our PBS Books Exploring Bipartisanship series with a timely conversation about civility, connection, and how we can begin to talk across our divides. This initiative, now in its second year, has been developed in partnership with the Bipartisan Leadership Project. Joining us this evening, Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson, celebrated journalists on opposite sides of Detroit's political spectrum, are longtime friends and have joined forces to show us that civil conversation isn't just possible, it's vital. Their new book, The Civility Book, published by Wayne State University Press, is both a guide and a challenge, urging us to reimagine what it means to listen, disagree, and respect one another. Welcome, Nolan and Stephen.
Thank you, Heather.
Hey, thanks for having us.
It is so great to have you both here. And, I wanted to start with a line from your introduction, which is read these pages with an open mind, be prepared to consider new ways of thinking and looking at conversations. As we begin, I invite everyone watching to do the same. Use the chat to share your thoughts, your questions, your reflections, and please remember to keep your comments kind and curious. So let's dive in. Nolan and Stephen, you've built remarkable careers as journalists, television hosts, and media leaders.
Thank you.
Your voices have helped shape public dialogue for many years. Nolan, you approach your work from a conservative point of view, while Stephen, you bring a progressive perspective. And yet, despite those differences, you've built what you call an unlikely friendship. So let's start there. Can you begin by sharing with us, in your own words, what is the Civility Book about? And I see underneath your names, it says the Great Lakes Civility Project. How is that related?
Well, I mean, it used to not have such a highbrow name. It started out as Bourbon Nights, and a long time ago, Steve and I, after working together on various media platforms, where we were put together to argue mostly, and we did that just fine, and we did it quite often and quite vociferously at times. We decided, we started noticing, that our friendship was developing despite these divides we had. And so we started putting together groups of my friends, groups of his friends in the back rooms of Detroit bars. And the only requirement really was that you drink some bourbon and talk to someone you might not otherwise talk to. That was sort of the genesis of this project, and getting people to talk to each other who might otherwise think they have nothing to talk about is basically what this is all about.
Yeah. So if you think about when we started our work together, it's now almost 18 years ago. And if you think about where the country was then in 2007, 2008, we were on the cusp of a pretty important presidential election decision that Americans were making. And after that election, people were really divided about the outcome. There were a lot of folks who were ecstatic that the first African-American, Barack Obama, had been elected to the presidency. And there were a lot of people who were not pleased with that outcome. There was a lot of discord. But if you fast forward from there to 2016, 8 years later, and think about how much worse the divide was after President Trump was elected the first time, and then fast forward another 8 years to just last year, 2024, when President Trump was elected a second time. I mean, are things any better? Would anybody say things are better? I think we all agree that they've gotten worse. And so I think a great way to understand our project is the curiosity that Nolan and I have had about that trajectory. Why have things gotten so much harder for Americans to do together or to even talk about, while for the two of us, it's all been the same. I mean, there have been lots of things we've disagreed about, had fights about, arguments, but we haven't gotten to that point where we're calling each other names, where we're getting up and walking away, where we're saying we won't have this kind of discourse anymore because we can't. And so the project really is looking at how can we share what we're doing with other folks.
And Heather, if I could just tell a quick anecdote. Years ago, Steve and I were up on Mackinac Island together, both of us covering the Republican State Policy Conference. And it's a whole lot of Republicans vetting candidates, talking about policy, and basically having a big party. And so the first night, Steve and I got done with our work, filed our stories, walked down from the Grand Hotel and walked into a local bar where there's a big, GOP party going along. We sat down at the bar and started drinking, and I got up a little ways into it and walked across the floor to take a break. And these two ladies, whom I knew, they ran a conservative website that was all about bashing Barack Obama. They jumped on me as I was going across the floor, and that doesn't really happen to me very often. And they said, "Is that Steve Henderson you're drinking with?" And I said, "Yeah." They said, "Is he your friend?" I said, "Well, yes, he's my friend." And they said, "Oh, we hate him. He's so awful." And I said, "You hate him?" And they were so convinced. They were so earnest. They said, "We hate him." And I said, "Do you know him?" They said, "No." "Have you ever talked to him?" "No." And I looked over and I said, "My chair is empty. I'm sure if you walk over there and take a seat, Steve would be happy to talk to you about whatever it is that's got you so angry at him. Now, I wasn't sure at all Steve would be happy to do that, but I thought it'd be fun to watch. And to his credit, they sat down and he talked to me, engaged with him. And I noticed that this was going quite well from my vantage point across the room. And I finally got tired of sitting there watching my ice melt. And I walked over and led them gently away from Steve. And as we were going, I said, well, what do you think? And they said, oh, he's so wonderful. We just love him. And nothing in that 45 minutes, hour or so had changed about Steve. Nothing had changed about them, except that they'd taken the time to talk to each other and fill the gaps in knowledge about one another, or assumptions they had been making about each other with actual knowledge. And that's sort of the light bulb moment for the Civility Project.
Well, I love that you shared that story, because that was one of my favorite stories in the beginning of your book. And really, it was a great hook for me. So sharing that story, I hope everyone out there who's heard that story understands how personal this book is, and how these stories really demonstrate that we can disagree better and we can listen. I think it was also helpful, and it was actually more in the appendix, to learn a little bit more about you, Nolan, and you, Stephen. And so before we jump really into it, could you just share a little bit about where you're from, your upbringing? Obviously, you bonded over bourbon, and this was conceptualized, a lot of this in a bar, but share a little bit about who you are, your background.
Sure. So I am a native Detroiter, born here in the very early 1970s. I grew up here, graduated high school, went off to the University of Michigan, and graduated there, and then started my career in journalism, which has taken me to Lexington, Kentucky, which is where I gained an affinity for bourbon. Nolan was born there, but I spent the first couple of years of my career learning about bourbon. Of course, I've been here for a long time. Also worked in Chicago and Baltimore and Washington before I came back to Detroit. In fact, I consider myself a progressive, and have always attributed that largely to circumstance, right? The time I was born, this country is just a few years after the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act are passed. I have parents and grandparents who suffered under Jim Crow. My father, in particular, is a poignant example of that. Someone who went off to serve his country in the Korean War, and returned to the United States, but because he lived in the South, in Mississippi, was still not a full citizen, couldn't sit at a lunch counter, couldn't have certain jobs, and key detail, was not able to collect the benefits of the GI Bill, which of course were available to white veterans. And so lots of the things that were changing at the time that I was born, the legal reversals of that kind of discrimination, helped shape the political perspective that I have. I'm also the grandson of a pretty prominent labor leader here in Detroit, one of Walter Reuther's very close aides. Walter brought my family here to help him connect with the Black political establishment that was growing in Detroit in the 1950s. And so that all sort of, cast forward to now when that's the lens that I have to use to kind of determine what I think and what I believe.
And Heather, Steve mentioned I was born in Kentucky, spent a good chunk of my childhood back and forth from Detroit to Kentucky, where I worked on my uncle's tobacco farm. My family struggled quite a bit, as did Steve's. We have that in common. There were hard times for us growing up. My father was out of work for almost a full year due to a labor strike at the chemical plant where he was working. And, it wasn't guaranteed that I was going to grow up and have a successful life. We have had to work really hard, both in terms of education and just physical labor growing up. But we always believed that that's what would get us up and out. And that sort of shaped my political view as a conservative. We didn't have much use for the government. Where I'm from, if a government man came down the road, we started hiding things, and mostly the first thing we hid was Grandpa. So it was a whole different view of the world. It instilled a self-reliance in me that has shaped my all of my values and my whole life. But at the same time, it instilled in me a great sense of fairness and clear view that not everybody in the world's getting a fair shake, and so that's informed my political views as well.
When did you realize that your differences could actually be a strength?
That's a great question. One of the things we did a few years back, I think, was a huge part of us, I think, realizing how those differences kind of played out in our relationship and how they could help us communicate with other people who are kind of similarly opposed politically. When the NPR program StoryCorps came to Detroit, I think this is in 2017. I got pretty excited. I worked for NPR for a long time here in Detroit, hosting a morning radio show. And I said, I definitely want to go do that. Most people, of course, take a spouse or a family member with them to do this, to talk about their relationship. I immediately thought that the person that needed to go with me was Nolan. That he and I needed to go and tell that story. And so we do. I sort of framed it as we needed to tell each other our stories. We had been working together about a decade at that point, and I think didn't know lots about where our views came from, like who we were and our backstories. And so I said, look, we're going to go into this little Winnebago on the lawn of the Detroit Institute of Arts, sit across a table with a mic between us, and tell those stories.
I brought the s'mores because I thought we were going camping.
So we tell these stories, and we realize a couple of things. One is that we heard things about the other that we hadn't heard before. Of course, we got new information about where our views came from. Another thing that happened, though, is that we saw this incredible commonality. I mean, our perspectives are very different, but there are lots of things about our backgrounds, about our origin stories that overlap, and as well, there are things about our aspirations and the things that we want for ourselves and our families and our country that overlap. I think we didn't realize that before we had that conversation. And then the third thing, of course, is that I just think we have a different kind of discourse now that we've had that conversation. There is a knowledge in each of us about the other that shapes the way we talk to each other. And I think that was kind of a moment where we realized that, yeah, we're different and there are important, deep differences between us, but there are also commonalities, and the combination of all of those things are what give us the strength to be able to talk about anything. I mean, Nolan and I will talk about anything. We will argue about anything. Nothing is off limits because I think we know each other well enough. We respect each other, and we know that that it's a safe space in some ways. That each of us can say things that we might not say to someone else, and it's not going to do the kind of damage here that it would elsewhere.
And Heather, mostly what we learned is that we want the same things. We want the same outcomes. We each want a more prosperous, fairer society, We want our children to grow up successfully. We want them to live in good places and in peace. It's the avenue for getting there, the route to getting there, that we disagree with. But once we realize that we share the same outcome goals, it takes a whole lot of the heat out of that, of the conversation. And the more we learned about each other and our backgrounds and the why behind why we believe what we do, the more respect we gain for each other. And with respect, I mean, that is the sort of basic ingredient for civility. And we were, that understanding allowed us to have far more productive conversations.
So the Civility Book, it is organized in a way that is really approachable, right? So you present insights, you give recommended actions, you have questions for reflection. And I'll even note, I'm going to jump to the end where, and I am a back matter girl. Anyone who watches PBS Books knows that, right? You have even like a K through 12, like you have curriculum, people can adapt. You have lots of resources. It is wonderful in everything that is in this one book.
And it doesn't take long to read, does it?
I know, it's a quick read too. If you're on a 2.5 hour flight, you could get through
it. It is. And I will say, I know a lot of people out there are nervous about the holidays. This is a great way, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about why this book could be a great book to give to everyone in your family, because I know that in the last few years, people have been increasingly stressed out about holiday gatherings because people are on different sides of the aisle. And this book really helps people to come together. And I want Nolan and Stephen to talk about, because you have 4 pillars, right? And you really outline how people can come together. And civility, in some ways, that word has been weaponized, right? And we think of it as it's almost like been poisoned by, like, people have been, partisanship has just taken over this word as not, but let's talk about that and then talk about what's in this book and how we all can learn about coming together and listening. And I'm going to throw it to you.
Well, where do you want to start with? The pillars, Heather? Do you want us to go right there, or? Yeah,
let's talk about the pillars, because I think that's really how we can approach this conversation.
Yeah. The 4 pillars. Why don't I take the first 2 and you can take the second 2? The basic pillar, as reflected in that story I told about the bar on Mackinac Island, is dropping assumptions. Don't assume when you hear somebody is this or that, Republican, Democrat, progressive, liberal, whatever their descriptor is. Don't assume you know things about them. Don't make assumptions about who they are. Take the time to get to know people and the why behind their identities. And we have a core principle in the Civility Project, and it's that all good people come to their viewpoints the same way. They take the information, the data available, and they run it through the pillars or through the prism of their personal values and experiences. And it's important to know what those experiences and values are before you start judging people. And so dropping assumptions, getting to know each other, talking to each other is the first pillar. And it's a thing you need to do before you start having difficult conversations with someone you have decided you could find value in. And so that's the first pillar. Second pillar is set honest goals for the conversation. And an honest goal is not winning. We say that a conversation is not a competition. Nobody enjoys sitting across the table from someone who's trying to beat their wisdom into your head. That just leads to friction. It leads to people walking away. Set an honest goal. And, we don't pretend that we want to bring everybody to the same point. We're not asking people to come to some sort of agreement. We're asking them to find value in their disagreements. And the honest goal we suggest is, what can I learn from this other person? What value can I take out of this conversation? Every time I talk to Steve, I'm never going to agree with him. We just are too fundamentally different. We disagree on absolutely everything. But I do find value in his conversation, in the conversation with him. If I woke up in the morning and Steve was on the phone saying, "Hey, you won me over. I agree everything you said," I just say, "Lord, take me home," because I don't know what my purpose would be after that. And so don't try to pound your ideas into another person. Leave your smugness at the door. Check your self-righteousness. Be open to learning. And so if you can get to that point where you can find value in a person, even though you disagree with them politically, we think that is a big move towards civility.
Yeah. And then the last two pillars, the third is listening. We use that word just a little differently, I think, than most of us use it in our everyday lives. I think most of us would say we know we're listening when we're not talking, right? When we're giving someone else the opportunity to talk. But of course, there's more to it than that, and that's what we try to get to in the book and in the project, is what are these other things you need to be doing to really invest in what somebody else is trying to say to you, the ideas they're trying to express. And I have two really quick tests for myself about how I determine those, whether I'm listening or not. The first is if I could repeat back to somebody basically what they said when they're done. Could I stand in that person's shoes for 2 or 3 minutes and articulate their point of view? Sounds easier than it is. You do really have to listen in order to be able to do that in good faith. And then my second test is whether I have questions for that person when they're done. I find that when I'm really listening to somebody, I'm curious about some of the things that they said. Maybe I don't believe some of the stuff they said. Maybe I've never heard it before. Certainly, I often want to know where they got it. And asking those questions, I think, is a reflection of that listening. It also has the advantage, I think, of rhetorically positioning yourself in a very welcoming stance. That interrogative form of our language is way more open than the declarative form, and it does lead to an exchange of ideas, which is the idea here, that civility is an actual exchange of ideas for the benefit of both parties, drawing value out of the conversation. And then the fourth pillar is the commitment. I forgot almost. The fourth pillar is about the commitment that we ask people to make to this kind of work. Nolan and I have been doing this for 18 years. Neither one of us has ever gotten up from an argument and said, I've had it with this guy. I'm done. I'm not coming back. And there have been times when I think we felt that so frustrated in an argument that you want to walk away. I think not doing that, staying and continuing to have the same conversations, continuing to explore the same issues together is key, especially right now as we are talking about people coming apart from their families over politics, something I didn't used to hear much about. But since 2016, I really have heard a lot more of people saying they can't deal with their brother, their uncle, their cousin, so whoever, because of this. Making that commitment and realizing that there is value in that commitment is real key to overcoming that urge.
I appreciate those 4 pillars, and I think there is so much explanation and a great framework that you really present in this book. In the grand scope of things, I also like to think about, and you brought this up a little bit in your book as well, I like to think about this conversation in light of our country's 250th anniversary of signing of the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. We are the great American experiment. How does this impact the importance of your message today?
Well, that's a good question, because as Steve mentioned, the last pillar is sticking to this, and certainly our nation has stuck to it now for almost 250 years, despite some really enormous challenges, and despite some egregious episodes in our history. We stuck together. And what worries me as we sort of move into this high-tech area and social media era and all of the other forces that are out there that make considerable profit out of keeping us divided. I worry that we might be approaching that coming apart time. And, that's why we're really committed to this and working so hard at this. I mean, we ask people to keep things in perspective. Policy is important. Politics is important. We need to engage on those fields. But as I said before, if Steve and I came to agreement, if you and your friend came to absolute agreement, you and your uncle or your cousin, whatever, what's really going to change in the world? Keep your focus on what's important, and what's important are the personal relationships in your life, and being able to communicate and maintain positive relationships with the people who are going to be there for you in the dark times. And sometimes we allow politics to divide us. That's the absolute dumbest thing in the world, to divide us.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to think about it is, and I think there are a lot of people who are in this space wondering whether this experiment is actually failing now after 250 years, and that we are witnessing, a coming apart that we may not be able to hold together, regardless of whether you believe that or believe that we will, persevere through this and remain one country, one people. Civility plays a role in both of those, right? The way in which we talk to each other, the way in which we try to respect people who think differently, whether this is going to be the country that has existed for 250 years or something different, that civil dialogue, that civil discourse in the public square, as well as in our very private spaces, is the path to those things. You can't get to either in a rational or reasonable way without the ability, to drop assumptions, to set reasonable expectations for your dialogue, to listen, and to commit to the idea that those things bring value.
So if we can take a moment and talk about the role of media and communication in building or breaking civility. And I guess I'm thinking a little bit about our society and how incredibly, especially within American society, information is, right? It's important in all societies, but as a librarian, right, we promote access of information.
Right.
And I always make the argument that the reason libraries are critical is because we are promoting access of information to all. Yet the technology, right, the technological revolution of the 21st century has kind of changed things a little bit. And social media also has changed things for, I guess, better or for worse. If we can talk a little bit about the impact of social media on information, and you started to allude to the polarization and maybe how social media and traditional newspapers and access to those newspapers online or otherwise, how is that formed, and how is that impacting the discussion we're having today?
Well, yeah, I mean, social media was, when it first came up, we looked at this as some great the tool to unite us, to keep us in touch with each other, to sort of break down the artificial borders and barriers between us. And it is materializing as just the opposite of that. I think it's the great evil in our society today. And it's one of those forces I talked about, profiting from our division and our disagreements. Social media now is dependent on us hating each other, as is a lot of the cable television and a lot of the online sites. They don't exist unless people are at each other's throats. And that's what people have become to expect, and what has excited them. And so now you have all sorts of one-sided information coming out, people gravitating toward news sources that reflect their opinions rather than give them the facts, the truth. And it's getting harder and harder to establish a hierarchy of credibility amongst our information sources. An article by Steve Henderson, Pulitzer Prize winner, comes up on Google, just below or above, some post from Bob the blogger in his mother's basement. And people read both of those with the same sort of sense that this is true.
Yeah, I mean, the social media thing, in fact, if you want to see us have an argument, ask us about social media. We do disagree, I think, about I think its potential. I think we would both agree that right now it's playing a pretty awful role, and that it's reflecting, I think, the difficulties that we're having with each other more than anything. I do think, though, that traditional media or legacy media, also has a role to play here, and that is in leveraging these new tools for those sort of old school values. In the old newsrooms of the newspapers and television and radio, there was a real premium that was put on community. There was a real premium that was put on the idea of building and preserving community. There was a real premium that was put on dialogue and engagement. And these new tools are incredibly powerful in that way. And I think part of the problem is that legacy media has abandoned some of those mission oriented goals and left the space to people who don't share those ideas, who really do see profit and possibility and division. I think lifting up those other values is something that legacy media can be doing more of.
And these new formats, these new ways of communicating with people and getting information out, they fueled the partisanship that I think is tearing America apart. I mean, Steve and I both worked in covering politics at a time where it was not uncommon to have to build coalitions between conservatives and moderates and progressives to get a bill passed, and where parties actually voted across the lines. They didn't all line up behind their leaders and cast their vote the same way. There was far more effort at consensus building, and I think this new information environment has just fueled and built this intense fire under partisanship, and I do believe that's tearing us apart.
Well, I just want to remind everyone out there, if you have a question or a thought, please type it in the chat. We will be answering questions in a few minutes. The Civility book, it gives us a lot to think about, and it doesn't just highlight the problem of polarization. It offers ideas, prompts, and practical actions that we can start meaningful conversations in our own lives. We can bridge gaps between people who see the world differently, yet share the same hopes for our country. So let's start to explore some of those ideas. throughout the book, you discuss the importance of conversation, not competition. How can everyday people step out of this cycle and reclaim control of the conversation?
Well, I think a lot of our conversation today is, the product of impulse, where, before we had to be much more deliberate in maybe writing out a letter, even writing out an email, or getting someone on the phone and talk. Now we can fire off our message in 5 seconds at the computer screen or on our phone. And so we have, you find this in the book, we have one piece of advice we offer people in communicating over social media sites, and that is that before you push the send button, ask yourself, does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by right now? And does this need to be said by me? And oftentimes, if you ask those 3 questions, you hit the erase button rather than the send button.
I think part of what you're getting at here, I think, is the difficulty that I think a lot of us have in knowing where to begin with this. Like, where do you start? How do you start? And just as a kind of framing acknowledgement, I think a lot of the division in this country, that a lot of the forces that are driving that division thrive from that frustration, right? They thrive on the idea of making us all feel like there is nothing we can do to change the things that we see happening. And there's kind of a desperation that fuels all of that. And so we talk a lot about the idea of acting where you have agency. None of us can solve, writ large, the problems that we have in this country as individuals, or bring people together. But you can reach out to that person in your family who is thinking differently from you, and who maybe you haven't been talking to because of that. You can make that effort. You can, outside of your family, it's your neighborhood, it's your school community if you have one, it's your religious community if you have one. There are places in all of our lives right now that are absolutely drowning in this, not just a division, but estrangement. The idea of us being and living separately. I think, doing what you can in those spaces is the first step. It is saying, I won't live this way. I won't succumb to the helplessness or the desperation that fuels all of this. I can do in those spaces something about it, and deciding to do it, I think, along the lines of what we're outlining in this book, and especially according to that last pillar, which is that commitment to stay in and not walk away. I think that's where every one of us can start. Every one of us has that potential.
And Heather, just to add to that one short thing, these are basically Sunday school lessons, things that you should have learned as a kid about how to interact with other people. And one thing we have never done in all these years, as intense as our discussions have gotten, as angry and agitated as we've been, we've never made it personal. We've never said, you're a blank. And as soon as you do that, now you're dealing with a whole nother effort to repair a relationship, because words hurt far more than deeds do oftentimes. And so we have never given into that temptation to name call or insult. Now, his thought bubble does quite a bit, but it's never come out.
Well, on that note, I'm going to try to take a few questions from the audience, because I know our time is nearing the end. So let me see what we can find. Excuse me 1 second while we... We have Melanie, who has asked us, how do we continue to engage when it's not political views, but views on basic humanity?
We get this question all the time.
Always the first question, right?
It is always the first question. And, you know, the truth is that this is the most difficult part of it. I mean, we do live in a time and in a culture where there are arguments still raging about recognizing everyone's humanity and recognizing it in the same way. And I always start this part of the discussion by saying, I don't believe that anybody has an obligation to countenance that lack of humanity that gets reflected from someone else. No one has the obligation to have to fight, even in a conversation, for equal footing as a human being. And that gets to the fact that there are some limits to what we're saying. There are some people who can't recognize that humanity in everyone else and don't want to talk that way. But I say a couple things about that. One, we are being encouraged on many fronts to over-identify, I think, the people who are like that. Right? We're being encouraged to identify anybody who disagrees with us as someone who questions our basic humanity and our basic rights. That's not the case. I think in many cases, the things that we're talking about, dropping assumptions and setting reasonable expectations and listening, gets past that surface assessment that says this is somebody who can't see me as a human being. And then the other thing I always say is, you know, the alternatives to this are all worse than what we're talking about. And we're witnessing that right now too, right? We are witnessing a return to absolute political violence, and political violence as a means to political ends that we haven't seen in my lifetime for sure. The refusal to lean in and to interrogate again a discourse to the point where you can really identify what somebody is about and see that there's value in what they think and have them see that in you. You know, I think we all have to do that, because what's the choice? Are we going to just go at it and you know, whoever's left standing is the winner? I mean, I think we're really at that kind of pivot point with a lot of these things, and that's difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, I'm somebody who has to do that all the time with race. There are all kinds of people who have to do it with gender or gender identity or sexual identity. I mean, these are things we still have not sorted out as Americans, but we have to be able to talk about those things. And I don't think we can jump to conclusions about what people believe, but I also think we can't shy from the difficulty of those conversations.
And Heather, we got that question the other night, phrased a little bit differently. It was, how can I engage with someone who voted for a person who is out to harm me? And, you know, our answer then, it was, you can't, I mean, very few people are casting their votes with the intention of hurting someone else. You know, we all have the reasons for voting the way we do, and most of us think our vote is going to improve the world for everyone. So you just can't assume another person's motives for casting their ballot. And that's why it's important to have these discussions. Why do you feel we'll be better off going this path than this way?
I just wanted to share this comment with everyone, because I think some people, and a lot of the comments I've been reading across the different platforms, it echoes Liz Lynch's comment about just appreciation for having this conversation this evening, and helping people with where they're at the moment. And so I do want to really thank both Nolan and Stephen for being here this evening. I know there's so much in this book, and I know that there are many ways to get this book, but I know many libraries have it as well. But as you think of a takeaway, Nolan and Stephen, could you give our audience members a takeaway, the one takeaway, if they take away nothing else from this conversation or this book, what do you want people to take away?
Well, we generally quote Dr. Martin Luther King as sort of our inspiration and the things we want people to keep in mind. And I'll paraphrase, but he says, we hate each other because we're afraid of each other, and we're afraid of each other because we don't know each other, and we don't know each other because we don't talk to each other. We're just asking people to talk to each other.
I mean, I would leave people with a kind of seasonal recognition of the opportunity here. We are 2.5 weeks from Thanksgiving, and that's a difficult time for a lot of people right now. These holidays when you're together with your family, this is a great time to think about the opportunities that you have in that family, in those family arguments or conversations, to try some of these things out, to try some of these approaches, and to think that maybe you get to a better space with somebody by reframing the way you go at the conversation. This doesn't have to be, blood sport the way that it has been, especially with your family. And this is the time of year when I think all of us has the chance to do that.
Nolan, Stephen, thank you for joining us and for reminding us that civility isn't weakness, it's strength. The Civility Book is a testament to the power of dialogue, empathy, and understanding, even when we disagree.
Thank you, Heather. Nice job. Thank you.
Thank you. For those watching, we invite you to explore more conversations in our PBS Books Exploring Bipartisanship series at pbsbooks.org. And if you'd like to continue discussion your own Civility Book through our PBS Books affiliate bookshop by visiting pbsbooks.org/bookshop, or go to your local library. Thank you for being part of this thoughtful conversation and for helping to keep civility alive, one discussion at a time. I'm Heather-Marie Montilla with PBS Books. Good night.
Support for Exploring Bipartisanship provided by the Bipartisan Leadership Project and viewers like you. Thank you. The Bipartisan Leadership Project equips people with what it takes to lead in polarized environments, find solutions for the common good, and enable families and friends to disagree without being disagreeable. Learn more at bipartisanleadership.org.